In the grand theatre of human desire, there exists a truth so counterintuitive it sounds like madness, yet so profound that ancient philosophers whispered it in shadowed halls, and modern Stoics anchor their entire lives around it. You gain control the moment you stop trying to. You become magnetic the moment you stop reaching. And the second you let go of needing to be chosen, you become the only choice that truly matters. Most people spend their lives trying to prove their worth through attention, performance, perfection. But what if that very effort is what keeps them invisible? What if the secret to being wanted isn't found in striving harder, but in becoming so deeply rooted in your own value that the world has no choice but to notice? This isn't about being cold. It's not about playing games. It's about mastering the art of internal stillness, what the Stoics called ataraxia, an unshakable serenity, a quiet self-command that speaks louder than any words. Today we're diving into the mindset shift that doesn't just change how others see you, it transforms how you see yourself. And if you're someone who's tired of overgiving, of being overlooked, of constantly wondering why effort isn't enough, this will explain everything. If these conversations speak to something real in you, something grounded in truth, philosophy, and inner growth, consider subscribing. It's a small gesture, but it helps us reach more minds like yours, and it quietly signals that you're walking this path with intention. Most people believe attention equals value, so they try harder, show up faster, say more, they text first, they compliment often, they respond instantly, and they think this is connection. They think this is how to matter to someone, by proving themselves over and over in little ways that slowly drain their energy. But all of it stems from a single hidden belief. If I stop trying, I'll be forgotten. And that belief? That's where the real damage begins. Because every time you chase approval, every time you reach just a little too far to be seen, what you're actually saying is, my worth is up to you. You hand them the pen and let them rewrite your story. It doesn't matter how confident you look on the outside, the energy underneath is what people feel. And the moment someone senses that you need their validation to feel whole, the power you thought you were building evaporates. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But how can you become who you truly are when you're constantly trying to mold yourself into what someone else might prefer?" The truth is, people aren't drawn to effort, not in the way we think. They're drawn to energy. The quiet kind. The kind that isn't reaching, isn't grasping, isn't trying to impress. It's the stillness of someone who already knows who they are. Someone who doesn't ask, "Do you see me?" but moves through the world as if to say, "Of course you do. How could you not?" This isn't arrogance, it's self-possession. It's what Aristotle pointed to when he said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." Because when you know yourself, when you truly live like you already matter, you stop performing and start embodying. You become the kind of person people feel before they even fully understand. But it takes something to get there. It takes stepping back from the instinct to prove. It takes breaking the habit of measuring your worth by the reactions of others. It takes real courage to stand still in a world that's always trying to push you into motion. So many people live their lives chasing attention, not realizing they're trading depth for noise. And what they don't see is that the ones who actually leave a mark, the ones who are chosen, remembered, respected, they're the ones who don't chase at all. They just exist so fully in themselves that others are drawn in without knowing why. Plato said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." But the truest kind of power is internal. It's the strength to withhold your need to be noticed, to hold your ground, to let silence speak on your behalf. When you have that, people don't just see you, they feel you. And they respect you, not because you demanded it, but because your energy never gave them another option. So the real shift happens not when you get better at playing the game, but when you decide you're done playing. When you stop auditioning for roles in other people's stories and start writing your own, everything changes. There's something rare about a person who doesn't explain themselves, who doesn't rush to be liked, who speaks with intention and walks away with ease. That's presence, and presence is unforgettable. Socrates once said, "To find yourself, think for yourself." So what happens when you finally stop thinking through someone else's eyes? When you stop asking, "What do they want from me?" and start asking, "What do I want to be surrounded by?" That's when alignment begins. That's when your world stops revolving around being picked and starts revolving around your own inner peace. And the paradox is simple. When you no longer need someone to choose you, you become the only choice that feels real. Because your energy says, "I don't need to be saved. I am not waiting. I'm already whole." That's what creates gravity, not the chase, not the effort. Just the quiet certainty of someone who values themselves enough to let the world catch up, if it wants to. We don't chase what we already have. That's not because we're ungrateful or dismissive. It's simply how the human mind works. When something feels secure, fully known, and always available, our attention begins to drift. But when something carries a touch of uncertainty, when it's just out of reach, just layered enough to feel like there's more to understand, it becomes magnetic. We lean in. We want to know more. Not because we're being manipulated, but because our minds are wired to explore the unfamiliar. That's why trying to be understood too quickly often backfires. When you offer every detail of who you are up front, when you always reply instantly, explain everything, overshare, overgive, you remove the space where interest grows. You become familiar too fast, and people don't treasure what they can figure out in 5 minutes. Aristotle once said, "The more you know, the more you realize you don't know." The same applies to people. When someone carries themselves with quiet confidence, when they're composed, centered, and at ease in their own presence, they awaken that sense of wonder in others. You find yourself wanting to understand them, not because they asked for attention, but because they didn't. Being rooted and calm is a kind of strength that doesn't ask for applause. It's not a performance. It's not a game of being distant on purpose. It's not manipulation. It's authenticity without pressure. It's knowing that your energy speaks louder than your words and letting it do exactly that. This is what I call intentional mystery. Not the kind of mystery built on withholding or pretending, but the kind that exists when someone is simply whole. When they don't need to be constantly seen or constantly heard to feel valuable. They're content with silence, and that silence, it becomes their signature. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is where one discovers one is not alone." When you're comfortable in your own stillness, you stop chasing noise. You stop trying to fill every gap with proof of your worth. You become selective with your presence, and that alone creates tension. Not uncomfortable tension, but the kind that draws others in. Because in a world full of noise, stillness stands out. When you're not quick to react or rush to explain yourself, people begin to listen more carefully. Your words land heavier. Your pauses become meaningful. You're not just another echo in the crowd, you're a distinct voice. And more than that, you're an experience. A presence that can't be replicated or easily dismissed. Plato believed that silence at the proper season is wisdom. There's a certain timing to restraint, a rhythm in not always responding. When you're not constantly available, people start to value the moments they do get with you. It's not about being cold, it's about having standards, about not handing your presence to everyone as if it costs nothing. This kind of energy isn't demanding. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply is. And when you carry that kind of energy, people start to notice the way you move, the way you speak, the calm you bring into a room. They feel the difference without knowing exactly why. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You don't need to be everywhere to be remembered. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. That includes how we show up in relationships. If every connection you make feels like you're constantly proving your worth, pause. Ask yourself, am I inviting real connection, or am I trying to be chosen? Because once you start operating from the belief that your value is self-contained, that you have nothing to prove and everything to protect, you stop giving away your energy in exchange for attention. You start holding it like something precious. And that shift is everything. The mystery isn't in being confusing, it's in being complete. You don't chase, you don't beg, you don't fill the silence with words just to be accepted. You let the silence speak for you. You let your stillness do the work. And what people feel in that quiet is unforgettable. Ask yourself this: could you walk away? Not threaten it, not pretend, but genuinely, without hesitation, walk away from someone who can't meet you where you are. Because that moment, the one where you realize you could leave without crumbling, that's where your power begins. It's not about being cold, it's about being clear. It's about valuing yourself enough to say, if this doesn't feel right, I won't force it. When you reach that level of inner clarity, everything shifts. You no longer sit in the seat of the applicant, hoping to be chosen, bending yourself to fit a space that was never built with you in mind. Instead, you become the one who chooses. You evaluate, you observe, you decide. It's a quiet kind of authority, the kind that doesn't raise its voice or explain itself to be understood. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But once you do, you stop negotiating your worth in the marketplace of other people's opinions. You stop asking, 'Am I enough?' and start asking, 'Does this align with what I truly want?' That shift in your inner dialogue is what creates presence. And presence doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it draws in. There's something rare about a person who doesn't try to prove anything, who isn't trying to be impressive or pleasing or perfect. They're just grounded, rooted in their standards, and that grounding creates tension, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that awakens curiosity. Others start wondering, what makes them so certain? What do they know that I don't? That kind of energy is magnetic because it doesn't perform. It doesn't adjust itself in hopes of being liked. It simply stands still and lets the world recalibrate around it. Socrates said, "Know thyself." And when you do, you stop depending on external validation to tell you what you're worth. You don't chase connection, you allow it. You don't fight to be seen. You trust that those meant for you will notice. This isn't detachment for the sake of appearing strong. It's self-respect. When you don't need someone to validate your experience, you become deeply free. You stop feeling anxious over mixed signals. You stop waiting for someone to wake up and recognize your value, because you already see it. And if they don't, you walk. You don't walk because you're trying to get a reaction. You walk because your peace means more than their presence. And that decision isn't dramatic, it's dignified. Plato once wrote, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." And one of the hardest things to conquer is the impulse to cling to potential, to what could be. But when you stop clinging, when you release the grip of fear disguised as love, what remains is clean, true, real. You're no longer navigating from need, but from choice. And choice feels different. It's lighter, stronger, quieter. What's truly magnetic is someone who knows they're enough, with or without applause. Someone who doesn't need to chase moments, because they trust what's meant to stay will stay. Someone who doesn't rely on another person's affection to feel whole, because their wholeness isn't up for debate. And if someone can't match your energy, your effort, your honesty, that's not your failure. That's your filter. That's the clarity that protects your peace. So yes, ask yourself again, could you walk away? And if the answer is yes, not as a tactic but as a truth, know that you've already stepped into the rarest kind of power. You've chosen yourself. And once you do that, you'll never chase what can't meet you again. Because the moment you stop fighting to be chosen, you become the one who chooses. And in that stillness, you become unforgettable. You don't become scarce by faking unavailability. That's just theater. People can sense when your silence is forced, when your distance is a performance. It doesn't feel powerful, it feels calculated. And the truth is, real strength doesn't need to pretend. Real scarcity comes from fullness, not withholding. When your life is rich, when your days are meaningful, your thoughts deep, your presence calm, what you offer becomes rare. Not because you're trying to be rare, but because so few people live that way. When you are grounded in your own world, when your purpose, peace, and passions guide your time, then sharing your energy becomes something sacred. Not because you're trying to prove a point, but because you've realized that not everyone deserves unlimited access to you. And once you internalize that, your presence carries a different weight. It's no longer something anyone can tap into just because they showed up. It becomes something that must be earned through alignment, respect, and genuine effort. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. When you live in a way that honors your values and your time, your energy naturally becomes selective. Not in an arrogant way, but in an honest one. You don't give access because someone asked. You give it because they've shown they can hold it, because they've proven, through their behavior, not just their words, that they understand what it means to be in your life. And that subtle shift in how you move, people feel it immediately. They start to treat you differently because they sense that your boundaries aren't negotiable, that you're not afraid to walk away if something doesn't match the life you've built for yourself. And here's where things get really interesting. The ones who can rise to meet that standard, they will. And the ones who can't, they'll drift, they'll disappear. But neither is a loss. Both are clarity, and clarity is peace. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But when your life is full, when you're in tune with your own soul, you stop fearing the silence that comes when others leave. Because your peace isn't rooted in who stays, it's rooted in who you are. That kind of wholeness is rare. It can't be bought, it can't be faked. And it's magnetic, not loud, not demanding, just quietly undeniable. So when you no longer give your attention cheaply, when you no longer open your space just to fill a void, when you live a life that you actually enjoy without needing to perform for anyone, you become something people can't ignore. You stop being an option and start becoming a standard. Socrates taught that the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And that's exactly what you're doing when you stop chasing people and start building a life you love. You're not making yourself unavailable. You're just not available to anything or anyone that can't meet you in the world you're building. It's not punishment, it's alignment. Because when your life is already rich, the people who add to it feel like expansion, not escape. And the people who subtract from it, You'll feel it immediately because you've worked too hard to confuse chaos with love. In the end, this isn't about scarcity. It's about self-respect, about having a life so full, so grounded, that any space you give isn't a plea for attention. It's a privilege. And those who recognize that will show up differently. Those who don't were never meant to stay. When they take longer to reply, most people panic. They start questioning everything, what they said, how they said it, whether they were too much or not enough. The anxiety creeps in, and before they even realize it, they're sending another message, a follow-up, a second attempt, a silent plea for reassurance. But behind every extra text is the same quiet fear. What if I'm being ignored? What if I don't matter? But not you. You stay still. You don't chase an answer. You don't spiral into doubt. Not because you're cold or indifferent, but because your self-worth isn't on the line. You've done the work. You've built the kind of inner strength that doesn't rely on outside validation to remain intact. And so, you wait, not out of stubbornness, but out of self-respect. There's a different kind of energy in that calm. A wait, a quiet confidence that doesn't need to explain itself. And people feel it. They notice the lack of panic, the absence of pressure. And suddenly they start to wonder, why aren't you reacting? Why aren't you trying harder? That curiosity alone shifts the dynamic. Because you're not trying, you're being. And being, fully, confidently, without apology, is far more powerful than any performance. It's the difference between reaching for attention and commanding it, between needing a response and choosing peace over urgency. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." But in adulthood, the greatest burden we carry is the life we refuse to claim for ourselves. The life where our reactions are dictated by fear, by need, by the unresolved need to be chosen. When you drop that weight, when you step into the version of yourself that no longer depends on another person's approval, you stop operating from emotional survival. You start living with intention. There's nothing more magnetic than someone who isn't controlled by impulse, someone who doesn't over-explain, overreact, or overextend. They simply exist in their own rhythm. They protect their energy without apology, and that kind of presence, steady, sure, and sovereign, shakes people in a way desperation never could. You create standards, not noise. You don't try to convince. You don't shrink to be digestible. You know what you offer, and you know it's valuable. So when someone's energy shifts or fades, you don't scramble to make sense of it. You observe. You let people reveal themselves, and in doing so, you protect your peace. Plato wrote, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And one of the greatest powers you'll ever hold is the ability to stay calm when your ego wants to panic, to remain grounded when everything around you invites chaos. That's not passivity. It's discipline. It's maturity. It's self-control in its most dignified form. And what you'll start to notice is this. When you stop reacting, people start responding. They're drawn not to your silence, but to what it implies. That you are not moved by things that once had the power to break you. That you're no longer willing to entertain energy that doesn't match the standard you live by. This isn't a tactic, it's a transformation. You're not here to chase. You're not here to beg. You're here to live from a place so whole that nothing and no one can make you question your worth. Socrates said, "He who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have." That contentment isn't about settling, it's about sovereignty. It's the quiet knowing that your peace isn't up for auction, that your energy is not a prize to be won through constant effort, but a gift reserved for those who've shown they're capable of holding it with care. So when they take longer to reply, you don't flinch, you don't fold, you carry on, Because your life is still full, your value is still intact, and your worth? It was never measured by how quickly someone got back to you, but by how deeply you stayed rooted when they didn't. Let this sink in. The moment you need someone to choose you, you've already handed over something sacred: your power. The quiet, steady kind that comes from knowing you're whole, with or without anyone's approval. As soon as your peace depends on their decision, your center shifts. You go from being grounded to being pulled, from standing tall to leaning in too far. And the truth is, most people don't even realize they've done it until they feel the ache of imbalance. But when your joy is yours, when your sense of purpose, your clarity, your peace come from within, you stop needing anyone to validate your existence. You're not waiting to be rescued. You're not hoping someone will come along and complete what's already complete. Instead, you're inviting them into something rare, something already rich with meaning, not because you're trying to impress, but because your life is already full. You're not chasing attention, and you're not shrinking to fit. You're just being calm, certain, present. And that stillness unsettles people in the best way. It makes them pause, because what they're used to is need, subtle or obvious, loud or quiet. There's usually some kind of reaching. But when you don't reach, when you simply exist as someone already complete, it disrupts their pattern. They're used to being needed, not being truly seen. There's a massive difference. Need says, "I can't feel whole unless you stay." But being seen says, "I already am whole, and I hope you're someone who sees that clearly." It's not demanding, it's not dramatic, it's just true. And in that truth, you create space. Not space that feels like distance, but space that feels like respect, like dignity, like you know your energy is a privilege, not a transaction. So you don't offer it lightly. You don't offer it just because someone shows interest. You offer it when it aligns, when it feels mutual, when it's met with presence, not pretense. Plato once wrote, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." And this is what that looks like in real life. You stop being driven by the need to be chosen and start operating from a place where being chosen is just a bonus, not a requirement. You let people come and go without letting it shake the core of who you are, because you've already claimed yourself. That's what creates the shift. When you no longer need someone to make you feel worthy, you show up differently. You don't try to prove anything, you just are. And that quiet certainty draws in the people who are ready for depth, the ones who've seen enough performance to crave something real, the ones who can recognize presence because they've had to build it themselves. Socrates said, "Be as you wish to seem." So instead of performing confidence, you live it. Instead of pretending you're okay, you actually are. And that's what makes people stop and look again. Not because you're loud, but because your silence says everything. In a world full of noise and need, wholeness is rare. Stillness is rare. And people may not know how to describe it, but they feel it. They feel the difference between being pulled into someone's insecurity and being invited into their peace. So no, you don't need to chase. You don't need to ask, "Did they notice me?" The only thing you need to ask is, "Did I stay true to myself?" Because when you do, the right people always notice. Not because they're told to, but because they can't help but feel it. And in the end, it's simple. When you no longer need to be chosen, you become impossible to overlook. Thank you for being here, for thinking deeper, and for being part of Stoic Journal. If this spoke to something inside you, there's more waiting. Go ahead and watch the next video on your screen. It might be exactly what you need today. Until next time, stay grounded, stay whole, and remember, the quietest presence often leaves the loudest echo.